Before I begin my sermon this morning, I just want to speak to you personally. The last 10 days or so have been very, very challenging for me professionally and personally, partly because of so many good things that are happening and just need attention and care, and also some challenging things that have been happening. And it kind of culminated this week in terms of a unbelievably hectic and full and draining week. Part of it was on Tuesday. John, my partner, his dad is 94 years old, lives by himself, and when John called him on Tuesday, there was no answer. And to John's credit, he persisted in calling, and eventually his dad was able to pick up the phone and sort of whisper to John that he had fallen and that he was bleeding, and that he needed help. And he wasn't able to figure out how to use the phone or push his emergency button, etc. And so John was able to make some phone calls, and his dad was taken to the hospital. And for a while, they didn't think his dad was going to live. And in fact, they called John back. John went down, and then they called John back to the hospital. And they asked me to come to London because they didn't think he was going to live. The good news is he is recovering, and he's sitting up, and he's reading poetry, and he's cracking jokes. And it looks like he's going to be fine, but it did create a kind of challenge and disruption and change during the week. And so this morning I am absolutely exhausted, and I just have almost no energy. And someone said during coffee hour, "Brent, do you need a hug?" And I said, "I'm afraid if you hug me, I'm either going to cry or fall asleep." And I don't know which it'll be. So this morning there's not the kind of bounce that there usually is. And I don't say this in way of an apology, because I hope that we can model in this church that you never have to apologize to say you're tired. But I say it as a way of explanation, so that you can understand that, we're going to get through this and things will be okay, and, some good rest and some issues getting sorted out and stuff. And, but just, for this morning, if I'm more emotional than usual, which may not be possible, I know for some of you to imagine, or if I'm just seeming tired, I am. And so here goes. This sermon this morning, why are there so many faiths and where does Christianity fit in, really relies on the foundation laid in the very first sermon in this series, Does God Exist and How Do We Know? Because I'm going to take it as a given, a belief in God, that God exists, and that God is revealed to humanity indirectly through God's intention and wish and hope for us, through the works that we see of God around us. And because God is revealed indirectly, then it's important for each one of us to be open to experience God, and to experience God in different ways. In fact, this has been true throughout history. Throughout history, many people have experienced God differently. And some of those individuals have been very magnetic. And as they have described their experience for God, it has drawn together other people to experience God in the same kind of way, and new faiths have been founded. In some cases, the historical context, what was happening in the day, really contributed to a new faith being founded. I think this is partly what contributed to Christianity being a new religion instead of a reform movement within Judaism. People were looking for something new. They were looking for someone new to save them from the fundamentalism of the religion of their day, because their faith had been taken over by fundamentalists, and to save them from the political domination and occupation of the Romans. So this early reform movement that Jesus started, in essence, broke away from its roots and became something new. However, in most of the world's major faiths, they were not necessarily the result of a historical action. They were the result of people experiencing this mystery, this other, this more, in different ways. And on this first slide, it illustrates to us that God is too big to fit into any one religion. that there have been a variety of ways that people have experienced this mystery and expressed this mystery. And the challenge for us is not just to sit on the fence and say there are all these faiths and then to dabble in them. The challenge for us is to pick a path and to go deep in that path without resorting to competition. And certainly without resorting to exclusivism, that the path you choose, the religion you choose, is the only one, and to avoid that mentality. Over the last 2 days, Friday and Saturday, well, some of you were enjoying the sunshine. I spent 2 days at York University in a conference of a very small select group of people by invitation only, co-sponsored by the Ontario Human Rights Commission and the York University Centre for Policy Development. We were brought together by the Human Rights Commission to help them to wrestle with quite a new phenomenon, the competing rights arena. That we have in human rights codes many different rights, freedom of religion, equality, etc. And more, those rights are colliding with each other, in essence, competing with each other. And the Human Rights Commission wanted to get some folks from very different perspectives to wrestle with that together. So for the first time, I was in the room with some individuals that I would not necessarily choose to be in the room with. People that I have argued in front of television cameras with, or debated at the courts, or fought in front of politicians with. And yet they brought some of the folks from the religious right and some of us from other perspectives together to talk about how are we going to live on this planet together when we seem to be competing. For instance, freedom of religion and human rights, equality for gays and lesbians. For there's a feeling among some gay and lesbian activists, including me, that under the guise of freedom of religion, that the radical religious right are trying to take away the rights that we've won. And so how do we exist together in the differences that we have on this one planet? Today, the gospel reading was chosen very specifically. In this series of questions, we're not avoiding difficult questions. We're not avoiding tough issues. We're dealing with them directly. And this scripture, the gospel reading this morning, is one of the most problematic for folks. Because if you take a literalist interpretation of what Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life, no one comes to God but by me. If you take that literalist interpretation, then you are left with the impression that Christianity is the only way. However, if you approach Scripture metaphorically, and we'll talk a bit more about this next week, but if you approach Scripture metaphorically, there is a much more important and deeper meaning to what Jesus said.